All right, so Arthur Kent became famous back in 1991 for his reporting during the First Gulf War. You may recall him as the Scud Stud.
Hello, New York. This is Saudi Arabia. This is not a drill.
But don't be fooled by the cutesy nickname, because Kent is a serious journalist with a career that goes back more than 30 years, not to mention the fact that he comes from a broadcasting family with his brother Peter and sister Norma. At the age of 19, Kent cut his teeth at the same CTV Ottawa affiliate where Peter Jennings started. By 22, he joined the CBC, becoming the youngest network correspondent in CBC history.
So we'll go out to Edmonton to get some Western reaction, and Arthur Kent in our CBC Edmonton studio.
Thank you, Norton.
Now, Kent has long been associated with Afghanistan. In fact, he made his first documentary on that country back in 1980, and Tom Brokaw took notice. Kent spent the next few years covering the world's hotspots for NBC. He scored back-to-back Emmys for his reports on the Tiananmen Square massacre and the fall of Romania's communist dictatorship. But a year after the First Gulf War, Kent was fired from NBC for reportedly accusing the network of dumbing down its news coverage. Kent sued NBC and won. He eventually wrote a book about it. Most recently, he's produced documentaries about the current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
All we know for sure is that drug traffickers are back in business at Kabul airport.
There's his bio. Here is the man, Mr. Arthur Kent. How are you?
Nice to see you.
Great to be here.
So about a year ago, you were on this show. We were talking about Afghanistan. You were optimistic. Things were changing. Do you still feel that way?
You know, I'm still optimistic over the long run because I've gotten to know the Afghan people. But unfortunately, over the past 6 months, I just kept getting more and more phone calls and emails from Afghanistan. Really the best, most accomplished and most promising young people and families asking for ways out. And, you know, this is an alarm bell. This is a big siren blaring, warning us and all the other international backers of Afghanistan that there are deep systemic problems in the Karzai government, in the government that we, after all, created.
Well, what kind of problems? Like, if you're looking at this at home and people are watching this, and we hear about Afghanistan in the news all the time, but what is it that's going there?
Well, you know, in a word, you know, I'd have to say heroin. Heroin is helping to finance the Taliban's war effort and Al-Qaeda's operations as well. And under our watch, Canada, the US, and our other allies, since the removal of the Taliban in 2001, the heroin trade has mushroomed from something worth hundreds of millions of dollars to many billions of dollars. There isn't really a reliable estimate on it, and it is simply corroding what little credibility remains of the Karzai government.
What's Karzai's role, if any, in all of this?
Hamid Karzai is presented by people like our Prime Minister and by President Bush and Tony Blair as the answer. Well, he's not. He's a front man, and unfortunately, because of the policies of the Bush administration, he was compromised by from the very beginning by the imposition of a lot of old warlords who could do what the Bush administration wanted, a cheap, easy solution to controlling territory while they got on with the Iraq War. And it's rebounded badly in the long term.
The Western world, who is, you know, who you talk about, who know about Karzai, do they know what's really going on? Do they present the front? Is it, or is it just turning a blind eye to it, recognizing this is just a part of doing business?
It is a case where the government of Canada and the Liberal government of Canada before the Harper administration was turning a blind eye. We know what's going on. We know who is at fault. We know which members of Hamid Karzai's cabinet are dirty, and there's no other word for it. You know, an information minister that's about to impose censorship by force of arms, is that the kind of thing that Canadian men and women should be fighting for? An attorney general with a murky past, an aide to one of the worst warlords in Afghanistan, a guy who's an avowed ally of Osama bin Laden. This guy creates a crisis in policing at Kabul airport, so that as a consequence, Kabul airport is now a gateway for heroin trafficking. Just miles from our embassy.
Protecting the airport? Like, this is what we're trying to get, for a lot of people at home who hear about Afghanistan, we're just trying to get a sense of the role the Canadian troops are playing there. They're obviously doing their best there.
Absolutely.
But how is that playing out, like, when all this stuff is going on around them?
Well, you know, Canadian Forces personnel are doing a brilliant job in Afghanistan, and all the polls indicate that the vast majority of Afghans want them there to help keep the Taliban and Al-Qaeda at bay. But Canadian Forces personnel don't control the airport. That's in the hands of the Afghan police. And the police chief at the airport was bumped in suspicious circumstances. He was an accomplished drug buster, yet last autumn he was suspended, removed. And other policemen who have leapt to his defense, the Speaker of the Senate who speaks in his defense, and other sources have confirmed to me that heroin resumed a very heavy flow through the airport under our very noses. Again, a very suspicious character, the Attorney General, appointed by Karzai at the whim, unfortunately, of the U.S. Justice Department, paying him back for this person, Sabet, the Attorney General, giving them a clean bill of health on Guantanamo Bay. You know, it's all part of the same pattern of short-term compromise and long-term blowback. It's got the Bush administration's fingerprints all over it.
You know, because you have such a close relationship with the country and the people, certainly more now than you did when you first went there, I wonder, is it a harder job for you to go, okay, listen, I have to approach this like a journalist as opposed to having my own relationships, because you know the place so well now?
I feel furious about what's happening to them. I feel especially furious knowing that my countrymen and women are contributing, risking everything in the field out of a sense of mission and obligation to an obtainable and a wholly noble goal, which is to stabilize Afghanistan and thus indirectly improve our own security by denying it to terrorists in future. I'm absolutely enraged that at a time when Canadian soldiers are risking everything, that our politicians and diplomats are somehow sitting back and remaining in the shadow of the Bush administration, whose lead in Afghanistan, as it has been in Iraq, has been totally, utterly discredited.
Yeah. Well, I wonder then at home, like in Afghanistan, there must be a whole generation of young Afghan journalists that are going to be coming up from this.
After the Taliban fled town, under the very noses of the old warlords that the U.S. re-empowered to take control, young journalists and young proprietors set up radio stations and television stations and ran away with the dream of exercising and practicing the first free journalism in the history of their country. And what they've accomplished in 4 or 5 years puts what we're trying to do to such shame. And they're the ones who are right now providing the only real cogent and effective opposition.
For a lot of people who saw you on television, I used to watch you on television, now I watch you online on a website, skyreporter.com. Do you have different access to stories? Can you tell different stories having your stories exist on a website rather than when you worked for network news?
You know, in many ways, I'm using new technology. I'm reveling in it. You know, these small, powerful cameras, laptop computers that can connect me to the World Wide Web, the ability to shoot and edit and exhibit your story instantly from anywhere in the world to an unlimited, potentially, audience. But in many ways, what I'm doing, the form I'm doing, is something of a throwback. It's what I learned here. It's what I learned and practiced at the CBC, at NBC News, where I was fortunate enough to work during its last glory years as a hard news network.
Did you get canned for criticizing the people at NBC?
Well, effectively, yeah. I mean, you don't resist. Big corporate news can sometimes, especially in the United States, be blind, be grasping, be avaricious. You know, the quest for ratings and revenue eclipsed the things that I got into the business for, which was adventure, you know, the search for a good story, the feeling that you were fulfilling some kind of civic obligation and duty. And yeah, when you spoke out against it, you know, heads rolled. And luckily, when mine rolled, I was able to pick it up and go somewhere else.
Nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
Arthur
Thanks,
Kent,
George.
everybody. All right, lots more to come on the hour, including this.